live. Work? Please work. Please OBS work. Good morning. I hope. It's my... I pray that this is working. OBS is like having some kind of massive stroke or heart attack and doesn't understand what it's doing anymore. Even though I haven't changed a dang thing about it in 2 months. Yeah, 2 months. I mean, it's been a while. So, hopefully we're live. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Sorry for the delay. Like I said, the new YouTube live is a little different. That it really wasn't the hitch, but my lord, OBS decided to just like not work. Every time it tried to activate my little terrible webcam, it would just freeze and crash. But it wouldn't crash out completely, so I had to kind of break things apart to make it work. Anyway, working now, that's all that matters. Okay, so we actually have a title and a theme for this month's live stream, and I want to, I kind of want to teach folks, because I know there are some of you who like don't have a local fish club, and maybe you're not, or your local fish club might not have a horticulture awards program. So, you know, I will refer to myself as a master aquatic horticulturalist, but not everyone has a club that does a horticulture program. So it might be kind of a question of like, well, how the heck do you become a master aquatic horticulturalist? That's what I'm going to teach you guys. It's the secret is it's not as complicated as it sounds, but we'll go over kind of that process, and then we'll take a bunch of questions. I'll try to like pay attention to chat while I'm rambling, but you guys know I'm long-winded, so you know, forgive me for some of those things. So before we get too deep, I just want to say thank you, Ginger, for reminding me of my epic fail this morning. I appreciate it. You're the best. But welcome everybody. Just gonna give a few seconds for folks to get in. So for those of you who do have local clubs, hopefully you have a horticulture awards program. And like most of what I've learned about plants has come from 3 different sources. So number one, Google and YouTube. Like I've done a lot of, I'm really good at online research. It's something I'm pretty good at as somebody who basically lives in tech for a living. It's one of those things that you just kind of naturally get really good at, is using Google to answer a lot of stuff for you or find you information. It's not always like answering a question. You don't always go like, how do I become a master aquatic horticulturalist? You don't just type that into Google. But you know, how do I grow, or what kind of things does X plant need? A lot of my research is done that way, and a lot of times it ends me up on some super random forums, and it can be a little strange in the sense that you will you'll go someplace that you wouldn't necessarily normally navigate to, and you'll find like one person who's had it or 2 people that have had it, and you start accumulating information that way. The second way, and like what I have found to be the most efficient generally for me, is experimenting. I after I kind of got like my plant basics down and understanding like this is how much fertilizer I needed to use for my tank based on the number of plants I needed, or how we're keeping rather. This is like if I'm using CO2, how that changed, how much light I was using, what types of plants would work and wouldn't work in the tank I was working with. When I started kind of getting that general feel, and it's you're never mastering that perfectly, like everything's a little different. Then it was just kind of like, well, can I grow this? Let's buy some and try it. You know, just like not being afraid to fail. And for those out there, like I think you will think that like, okay, somebody like me who has done my club's Master Aquatic Horticulturist program 7 times over, you would think that I never fail on plants, and that is not true at all. I still fail on plants. I still, like very recently, I had a species of Blixa japonica that's a rarer variation of it that grows very differently and is way different colored, and it just was not happy. It did not like my tank at all, even though I've put all sorts of rare plants in that same tank, and it has CO2 and it has good light. Didn't like it, just melted apart. And thankfully I didn't pay much money for that plant because it was something that I got through my club. But still, like, this is within the last 3 months. I had that major plant fail, but then like 2 of the other plants that I got at the same time that I'd never tried before. Both of those have done just fine. So 2 out of 3 is not bad in my book. Like, for every 1 failure I have 2 successes. I'm going to be pretty happy about that overall. Now, for some of you, that might be like, yeah, but isn't that going to cost a lot of money? Sometimes. Just don't do, like, the crazy super rare stuff. Like, don't look for, like, the rarest, neatest crypt or boost or whatever that people are going to charge you $100 for. Do stems. Or do some other stuff. Like, skip the crazy expensive stuff until you've, like, really locked down and stuff and you really want to challenge yourself. But just understand that, like, even I am going to screw up a plant. So if I buy like a $100 boost or something like that, I still stand a reasonable chance to watch that thing just melt and fall apart on me. And that's not a fun feeling. So be prepared when you get to that point. Like, in order to keep kind of pressing for something new, you have to be willing to fail. Just, it's not about you've necessarily done something wrong, because a plant can come from one water system. Like, maybe it's supposed to be a soft water plant, but its entire time it's spent growing very well in Florida, where the water's quite hard compared to, say, like my water here in Seattle. And if I bring it to Seattle, and even though I'm trying to buffer my water up and stuff like that, it just might not be happy, and it might never do that conversion over to my water system. We have to be ready for those kind of things. Like, one of the other big things is, like, just know that your water is always different than anyone else's water, even if they live in the same city as you, because you're probably doing something different. So be prepared for some plants to just, like, decide, nope, I don't want to. It just happens. The last, like, third thing, as far as, like, how I've learned everything I know about plants, is, in my case, this is where, if you have a local club that has a horticulture program, this is what I've done. I've talked to my local club members. I'm very, very thankful that we have an extremely, extremely smart and knowledgeable chairperson for our horticulture program here. His name is Roy. He is fantastic. If you've ever watched a lot of the, like, plant forums, if you've ever seen a guy who goes by the handle Seattle Aquarist, that is my HAP chairperson, Roy. He's phenomenal. Now, that being said, what if you're not in a club? You don't have a club local, maybe just your area doesn't have one, or you kind of live far away from any, your nearest club is like a fairly long drive. How do you do the same thing? How do you gain that same knowledge level? And what would it take for you to basically consider yourself, because, you know, you're not going to get a certificate from a club, but what point do you get to the point where you go like, yeah, I'm a master at this stuff. I've mastered aquatic horticulture. So there's kind of like 2 ways. You could look at a different club. So an example, you could go to the Greater Seattle Aquarium Societies Club, gsas.org. And it is perfectly there and available there's like, I think it's contests, and then you'll see Horticulture Awards Program. You could go there and look at the rules for our Horticulture Awards Program and just keep track of it for yourself in a spreadsheet, which is what I do. I track all my stuff in a spreadsheet on top of all the tools that are built in for my club. But it's one of those things where if you use that, you can look at other clubs and how they do those things. Another great one is going to be the Missouri Aquarium Society, which is MASI, M-A-S-I. They have a really, really good program as well. If you look at those programs, you can kind of follow them and get an idea of what the bigger clubs that really stress plants do, and follow that on your own. You don't have to be a member of the club, to like follow those things and know that you've done the same thing as someone like me, or say Corey, right? Corey's Master Aquatic Horticulturalist comes from the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society. So if you were to follow what he did, you would do the same thing. You don't have to be a member of the club to do the same thing. Now, a long-term goal, and this something I'll share with you folks, is I want to be able to put together a program like this for anyone on the internet. Anyone. It might be something where I talk with, maybe it'd be something like talking with someone like Corey, to create something to where if you don't have a local club, but you pay attention to any number of YouTubers online, creating like a uniform between at least us, like hyper plant nerds, program that allows you to become a Master Aquatic Horticulturalist, even get the certificate and everything, because most of us have done these things through our clubs. There's no reason we can't translate that online. Now, granted, this is kind of a long-reaching goal. It would be... You'd have to create like some dedicated website and tools and stuff like that, because tracking it is a lot of work, but it's very doable. Mr. B, you can be the first member, man. It's cool. I don't mind. But it would be something that I have considered, because I've had a lot of folks like you guys who are in chat. Probably one of the best examples, one of my favorite people to talk to is a gentleman named Carrie, who watches the channel, and he's asked me a lot very recently, which is actually where the whole idea for this live stream being semi-themed came from, was from a question from him, which was like, how did you become a Master Aquatic Horticulturist? How did you learn all this stuff? And I know I just said that wrong. I know, it's early. How did you do this? How do you master plants? Where do you learn? Where's the courses? And it's like, well, there's not really courses. And yet, I've kind of slowly been teaching those things through my channel. So, it's kind of something that's been in my head for a bit. And the big, like, I guess the holdback is the fact that, like, you would have to create a website and have to create a bunch of tools, which, maybe if I got lucky, my club would let me steal some of their tracking tools, but that's something that's in my head. Now, for you folks in the short term, just look at, like, Candy's linked those. Thank you very much, Candy. Like, there's the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, and there's MASSI, the Missouri Aquarium Society. Both have phenomenal horticulture awards programs. Great people who do lots of cool plants. They're very easy to just look at what their program requirements are and follow those. If you follow them, and you can get to the number of points is how we track it, because it's just a simple way. But if you get to the same thing that would have been a Master Aquatic Horticulturalist, my mouth does not want to say that word today, and I don't know why. But if you reach the master level at home, tracking it on your own, as long as you're honest about it, don't go cheating now. You've done the same thing that I have done, that Corey has done, that any other person in that club that has that certification has done. And it's really just it's kind of just a fun thing. It's not like you wouldn't take that and put it on a resume or something like that, if that makes sense. Like, in our fish resumes we talk about it, because it generally means that you've grown a fair number of plants. In my case, like, between my having done the 7, and I think I'm actually at 8 now. I'll have 8 come our holiday party. So I've done Master Aquatic Horticulturalist, said it right that time, 8 times. So I'm a crazy person. Like, I'm not normal in any way, shape, or form. But all that has been is what that translates to is 45 species now of plants that I have propagated, and then something like another 30 of those species that I've propagated have been flowered, which sounds like a really tough task. But if you're a person who loves to like literally take an entire tank and dedicate it just to growing plants, it's actually not that hard. It's just being willing to spend the time. So there's kind of like some basics. Now, let's say you're Mr. B or you're Candy or anybody else who doesn't have a local club, who's in chat right now, or maybe you're watching this on replay. Okay, what do I do to learn plants? Where should I go? There's a couple of really good resources. Number one, YouTube is actually a phenomenal resource. There are lots of channels that will give you some reasonable information about plants. One of the ones, if you want to go at a very high science level, you will want to look at Dennis Wong. And you can literally just look up Dennis Wong and like aquatic plants. He does some very, very, very detailed information. Now, he's a high-level aquascaper, very good at plants. And you will learn a lot of things like CO2 and off-gassing and all those kind of things. Like, he has a what I would consider a master class on CO2. And I will blatantly admit that at some point I intend to do a far better CO2 video, and a lot of it is taking cues from his video. Just because the information is so good. And he's got some phenomenal charts and stuff that I don't have that are his. So, like, if you really want to learn some hardcore science nerd level stuff, Dennis Wong is a great source. There are other folks who, like, generally give some good information. Like, Lucas will talk about plants every once in a while. Is it Justin is his name? The H2O plants guy, like, he does some reasonable stuff. I think that, personal opinion, the amount of information he could give could be significantly better than what I have seen. But I also, like, I can only consume so much stuff, and if in 2 videos I haven't, like, put you on that short list, it's kind of hard for me to catch up on your videos every once in a while. I just don't get that much time. But another great example, Corvus Oskin, so Joel, my buddy, he talks about plants all the time. He's been really cranking out some really great videos lately that give lots of information about individual species of plants. So he's talked about several of stuff that, like, the Aquarium Co-op carries, for example. He's gone on great detail on how to take care of those plants and how to be very successful with them, how to propagate them, all that kind of stuff. My channel, of course, like, I have Plants for Profit, and in that I'm very specifically teaching you how to grow plants at a rate that you can make money off of them. So if you apply those to just to, like, grow plants in the first place, that it's going to teach you how to do them well, right? Very, very simple. There's lots of resources. YouTube is really good. It's a visual aid. It's accessible pretty much anywhere. That's great. Now, if you want to go a little more in depth, you can look at something like the Barr Report. That's Tom Barr. Yeah, and thank you, Ginger. That's a great example. Like H2O Plants, he gives some pretty great starter info, but I mean, that guy knows a lot about plants, so you would think he could really go deeper. But if you just want to, most people who are kind of like really just need the basics, and from there, honestly, you can go into like the Barr Report. There's the planettank.net. Now, these are kind of like older resources, but they still have people very actively on them, and they have lots of good info. Finally, if you really don't want to look at random old forums or watch too many YouTube videos, don't be afraid to buy a plant and just try it. It's 90% of what I've learned about plants has been, that plant looked cool, let's buy it and put it in a tank and find out what happens. And I've been pretty successful doing that. Like, most aquatic plants are pretty flexible. They're designed to have all sorts of things happen to them in the wild and keep surviving. Especially when it comes to, like, if you want to be, say, a crypt specialist or a sword plant specialist, maybe you want to be a person who only does stems. Like, there are people who, like, really focus on very specific things. Learn the most simple version of that plant, and you can probably apply the lessons from the simple version of that plant to all the other, like, more complex ones. Website together, because I'm not busy enough, Ginger. But so, like, a great example would be, like, if I wanted to learn some of the harder Pogestamons, like Pogestamon Kimberly, Pogestamon Heidelberg, some of those which are rarer and harder to find, start with Pogestamon Octopus, just standard Stellatus Octopus. Get used to how it grows, how much light it likes, how much nutrients it likes, and then you'll know the basics of how almost every Pogestamon grows. And then, like, the second one I would look at, because it's a little different, is like Pogestamon erectus, which, like, I swear it's Candy's favorite plant. You would look at that plant and go, okay, what's the differences between these two? Now you probably know how to grow 95% of all Pogestamons, and the difference just becomes like, well, does this one have a different color? Does it need CO2? Because most of them don't, but some of them just do better with CO2. Like, Pogestamon Octopus will grow so crazy fast, you will never be able to catch up with it with CO2. But without CO2, it's pretty manageable. Pogestamon erectus will grow without CO2. It grows very slowly, but if you want it to get very dense and bushy, you want a little bit of CO2 in your system. Like, these are some small examples of, like, the differences between the two. Adam, let me get to that question in just a sec, but I will answer it. So, we've got that kind of covered, right? And then, like, you can apply those same things over, like, Ludwigia, Rotala, any of those stems, Anubiuses. Like, if Anubius standard Barderi requires almost nothing, most likely every standard green Anubius requires almost nothing. The difference would come out if you are looking at, like, the white Anubiuses, right? Those are, when you start getting some of the really weird stuff, forgive me. The seasonal stuff is here, folks. I hate to break it to you. Sorry, my girlfriend's off on the side. She just did something that made me laugh. I can't help it. Anyway, you can take, like, the most easy version of each plant and learn the basics of how that plant grows, how you propagate it, and then you can slowly apply that information to the others within the species, as long as they look kind of similar. So, like, some examples would be that, like, if you get basic Rotala rotundifolia, the basic lessons you learn from rotundifolia can apply to Itra, to mini butterfly, and, like, I swear 100 different species. But where it doesn't cross over perfectly is when you start seeing those very different leaf shapes. So, like, Macrandra, Rotala Macrandra, has some slightly different growing requirements, and you'll notice there's a very different leaf shape to it. Or, there's other examples, like any like the needle leaf kind of plants that come out, where you have these really fine leaves compared to a broader leaf. There's some small differences on how you do those, and it's just one of those things where you just kind of, you play with them a little bit, and as you get willing to play and just be like, I might not do this perfectly, but you get to watch the plant, and if you pay attention to the plant and you see certain telltale signs, you learn these, like the deficiencies. There's a great deficiency chart out there. You basically just have to look up, like, plant deficiency chart. You will find it on Google, guaranteed. And it's one of the best things to, like, literally just print out and put it on your wall right near your whatever tank you're doing your plants with, so that every time you go, like, oh, that plant's not looking so good, let me look at it, what's going on? That's got a couple holes in the leaves, and then just look up at the chart, and it'll show you exactly what that usually means, which is typically, like, that's a X deficiency, right? Oh, I need to dose a little bit more of that in my tank. If you kind of play with plants and learn these little things, the harder plants get really easy. They become not hard. There's just getting used to all the telltale signs that help make the hard stuff easy for you. Okay, let me answer that question. Where do I find rare plants? So in my case, I'm very, very lucky that my club brings in a lot of rare plants. Between several members of our club, there's, like, guys who are, like, crypt specialists that are in special groups of people who know, like Kara Wade as a great example, and a few other people who go and collect wild plants, bring them in, cultivate. they're only allowed to bring back 6 plants when they go into the wild. So they'll take a couple of them and they'll cultivate them, and then that goes out to a small group of friends, and then they're like the next ring of that group of friends, where it goes out to like 3 really good like botanists for a living kind of people. They cultivate them out, and then it starts going out to the high level hobbyists that they know who have just made it into this kind of circle of friends. But how do you get around that if you don't have those people locally, right? You can look at some of the places that tend to carry some more interesting stuff. You have places like Boost Plant. You will have online sellers. While I have never bought anything from him, I have to hope that he does a decent business with the H2O plants. I've heard generally good things from some folks I know that have bought there, but he tends to carry some rare stuff. There's all sorts of really smaller operations of people who grow plants. Like I can, hopefully they're still around. There used to be an example would be one place I tried was Rice Family Aquatics, and they actually carried a surprisingly good selection of stuff I hadn't seen locally. And that's where an example would be one of my favorite plants that I have is a species called Hygrophila green olive that is kind of different because it's super dark green, and it's a slower grower in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't grow too crazy unless you push a lot of CO2 at it. Oh, look at that. We got our first like auto held for review. It's my favorite. I wish you guys could see some of this stuff. It's like I'm gonna take a small aside. This is a message that none of you have seen except for Candy. But just for you, guy who posted that, I want you to hear this. Need to find some joy in your life, my friend. You really do. Something. Because if that is your form of entertainment, you gotta be miserable, bro. You gotta be. Find some joy, my friend. Find it. Like, jeez. Anyway, let's get back to talking about plants. That's way more fun. So some great. Hey man, Copperleaf Amania is really cool. Adam, that's a cool plant. It's not about, I would say, rare plants. I want to go down this rabbit hole. This is kind of a rabbit hole. So, rare plants are all about where you are. An example. A lot of people think that, we'll look at like Rotala Florida, right? Or Rotala Florida Ramiosaur, which is something that like Joel just got in. We had a version of it before, and we got another one now. He's got like the true purple and the not full purple from when we got it at AGA. A lot of places consider that plant very rare. Well, my buddy Alex, who's over at Secret History living in your aquarium, he went to Florida and he saw tons of it out in the natural water systems. It's just there, right? So it's kind of one of those things where like each location is going to have plants that are rare, and the rare plants somewhere are going to be super common somewhere else. So like an example in chat, this is mentioned, and I'll address it now. I'm sorry, it's a little slow. You'd asked me about Persicaria species Sao Paulo. Well, obviously, if you're in Sao Paulo, that's a little more common, right? Because that's where it comes from. But to someone like me in Seattle, I have not yet had my opportunity to put my hands on Sao Paulo, and which Persicaria, for those who maybe you haven't seen the Persicaria that I grow a species that comes from India. It's just called Species India. They're these really cool, long, like thin leaf, like big, think like a large blade of grass type plant on a stem, and they have a very kind of woody stem. But what's really cool about them is that they grow really well in water. They have a fairly stiff stem, and they can grow all the way up out of the water surface and above, and they have very different looks below water and above water. So you'll notice, like in the Plants for Profit tank, there's always this like big kind of reed-looking plant that grows out of the top of the water and has these big leaves on it. That's always my Persicaria, and I love that plant specifically to let it do that. So like that plant is getting moved out of the Plants for Profit tank, and it's going to go into Animal House once I can get Animal House done. The delays have been killing me on that, but life is real. Because I want something that'll break the water surface and come out because of what I have planned in my head, and that plant is perfect for doing it. And like if I had some of the Sao Paulo, I would probably try that plant as well, just because it's another Persicaria, and I have thus far really enjoyed that species of plants. Like JH Aquatics, hi buddy, good to see you, Joseph, has got Hygrophila species tiger. That's something that's not common at all up where I'm at. We would consider that a rare plant. But in the case of somebody like Joseph, who's got a hold of it, it might be more common where Joseph is at. Or maybe it's, if you're in the East Coast of the United States, certain Ludwigias are very common. They're just naturally growing in the water systems out there. And then you would look at India, right? India has all sorts of plants, but no Ludwigias. So Ludwigia might be really rare to somebody who's out in India doing aquatics, where in the United States, they grow all over the place, right? We have tons of them. They're really, really awesome. So it's kind of like rare plants to me is kind of it deserves quotation marks. But that being said, the best resources tend to be just look up the plant name. A lot of times Etsy is surprisingly a really good resource for finding uncommon plants. There are plenty of good smaller sellers out there. Like I had mentioned, Rice Family Aquatics, for example. They're just somebody that I've tried in the past. But also on Facebook, there are all sorts of different aquatic plant groups that you can kind of sneak your way into. And those people will sell off their plants. And a lot of times those groups are full of rare plant collectors. And they're all kind of trading with each other. So that's a really good way to find rare plants. An example would be there's a rare plant I used to keep that I need to be able to keep again. And I have to go track it down, which is a species of Pogostemon called Heidelberg. It went through my club, and I think 15 or 20 of us were growing it all at the same time. And then we were all like, oh, well, that person has it. I can sell off the last of mine, and I'll just pick more up from them. And we all did it at basically the exact same time. And most of them sold out of the Washington area. And then none of us had it anymore. And we were all three of us were scrambling between every person we knew that had the plant, and none of us could find it anymore. And it was just like it was gone. Yay, they're still doing stuff. Straight. Sweet. Thank you, Candy. So that was an example I gave. And I mean, there's lots of others that are out there. Facebook and Etsy are really, really good resources, surprisingly. Now, that being said, I've seen some of the folks on Etsy charge a lot for their plants. And you can even use eBay. The things you might not think about, eBay, Etsy, they're actually really good resources for finding rare plants, because there's only one or two people that are selling that plant, and they've realized no one else is selling it there. So they kind of have a hold on the market. That being said, you might pay a lot more for a plant than you might want to, but these are resources that are good for finding rare plants. And there's bigger sellers, again, Boost Plant is big. They sell a lot of stuff. If you're looking for tissue cultures and not necessarily rare stuff, you could look at there's Aqualab Aquaria, there's Aqua Forest down in California. There's a million of them, let's be honest. A place that I will give some love to, which Candy might not initially have, so I'll go find it. There's a little store that is here, local to me, who does sell online, and she actually carries quite a few relatively rare plants that you can buy online. And this is all stuff that she grows. For example, she has stuff like marbled boos. Is stuff that I know that she's grown and has available. I just want to get the... I'm secretly looking over on the other screen to get the website for you guys. There we go. Found it. So this is a local store to Seattle, much like Aquarium Co-op, except this is the high aquascaping, ADA level crazy nonsense. This is a person who was at one time world ranked 98th. She trained under Mr. Amano, all that kind of stuff. She has a camera signed by Mr. Amano that she uses for all her pictures in her store. That level of cool. I don't doubt your abilities, Candy, but this one's a little harder to find. Just because it's sort of hidden, but sort of not. So this is, her name is Fiona, by the way. She owns this shop. Super nice gal. I've talked to her a bunch of times. She even watches my channel every once in a while. But yeah, no, this is somebody who, another place where you can find some rare plants. Oh, it's a local business. It's Small Business Saturday, so why not give a small business some love? But that being said, like, don't worry too much about what is rare, because what's rare in one place might not be rare somewhere else. And even places like Dustin's Fish Tanks will sometimes get plants that are kind of rare in mass. It's just a matter of what is available on some of the order lists through the big distributors for some of those places. The only thing that I will caution you is that unless it is someone like Aquarium Co-op, where they specifically have a policy where they try to convert the plants for you before they ever ship them to you, if it is a big enough retailer of plants and it's a bunch plant or something, or a potted plant, it is probably immersed grown, and you will have to convert it from immersed to submerged. So just be prepared for that, because not everybody does the conversion for you. And even like people who are really good at plants, myself included, have had struggles getting plants to convert from immersed to submerged, even in a system that like has a Fluval 3.0 on it, has CO2, like all these things where it should be perfect for plants. Sometimes plants just don't want to convert, and it can be how it's kept in the big farms and stuff like that. You know, like if it's a plant from Tropica, or it's a plant from Dennerley, or whoever like held the potted plant and grew it immersed in the first place, their conditions to shift to underwater, you could have like if you live with really hard water, it's a lot harder with certain plants. It's just, that's the way it is. For some plants that like hard water, soft water like mine is just the devil for them. So like, you know, Java ferns and well, Java ferns a little more so like Anubias and Monte Carlo, for example. Monte Carlo, like this super popular, super common plant, we in Seattle actually have to do a lot of work because Monte Carlo is kind of a calcium hog in order to keep it healthy, because our water has no calcium in it whatsoever. It's super, super soft, and Monte Carlo likes a little bit harder water. I have had plenty of struggles with Monte Carlo because of that. And even with me buffering, there have been times where I haven't buffered enough. So that's fun. Okay, so we've gone through some rare resources, kind of my basics. If you're just showing up, welcome. Happy Small Business Saturday. For those of you who are out there, like, give some love to your local fish stores and stuff. They're small businesses. Give them some love on this day. Congratulations on surviving Black Friday. I went out very, very little. I didn't do like what you would consider your classic shopping. Like, I did dumb errand running. Like, I had to pick up some stuff for like cats and stuff like that, and it was it's like even that like simple stuff. We'd see something, like my girlfriend and I were out and we saw certain stores and we're just like, don't go there. It's like, just avoid that entirely. Or like I had to go into a Joann Fabric to pick up some polyfill to use in some like filters, right? Because you use filter floss and all that kind of stuff, right? It's, polyfill is the most common stuff at a craft store. It took me, I think, 15 minutes to get through the line at the Joann Fabric of all places to buy my one little bag of polyfill that cost me $9. It's like, oh boy, I picked the worst day to do my errands, but what do you do? Yeah, and like JH is saying, like he's seen soft water just melt the plant overnight. So you could have plants that are grown in really hard water, and the second they move to soft water, they do not like it. And things like that happen. So I want to go back to that thing. Don't be afraid to fail. Never, never, never be afraid to fail. Because some plants will, some plants won't. It just, and you'll never know which one it is. Sometimes some of the easiest plants to keep. I have had Anacharis, which is like considered a weed in most places. I have had that stuff twice. And the first time I had it, it just melted and died. I think I had 30 stems of it, and one survived the whole time. And it came in immersed at first, and it was in a tank with CO2 and decent light, and it just, nope, did not want to survive. And then, like, the single stem that survived was enough to kind of be like, okay, I could get one to survive. If I get, like, one more surviving, then I can propagate from there pretty well. And I think I bought like 10 more stems of it, and it all did fine, and then it grew like crazy because it's an Acarus, and of course it did. And I'd like kind of checked it off my list of plants I wanted to try, and I didn't like the way it looked after it finally converted. I liked the immersed grown form far more than the submerged form, and I got rid of it, you know, things like that. But like an Acarus, super easy plant. I had 1 in 30 stems survive. It just happens, which, by the way, Kayla's Aquatic's happy birthday, buddy. So don't be afraid to like just screw up a plant. Just don't ever be afraid. That's part of how you learn to a lot of stuff. Is just like, let's just see what happens. It's like one of the easiest ways to learn. You just find out what happens, man. it's just something you can't be afraid of. So, with that being said, like, there's kind of my spiel. For those who missed it, well, watch the replay. No. But yeah, eventually, my goal is to put together a program where anyone, anywhere, can basically participate in a horticultural awards program very similar to my club's program, maybe with some small alterations, we'll see, and be able to go through effectively the same kind of certification process that I went through in order to be a master aquatic horticulturalist. So that's kind of a long-term goal I have, maybe before like end of 2020. It depends on how certain things shake up and what I have planned and I'm trying to do and work, and you know, I only get so much time. Like, I'm trying, an example would be like, I really want to go to Aquashella Chicago in 2020. It's kind of a goal is to be able to go to at least one convention next year, and I think that's the one I've chosen. There is also this really cool, well, to me, really cool rainbow fish convention coming up in basically in Toronto, and I'm really thinking about going to that because that's going to be like the most nerdy convention. This is going to only be rainbow fish nerds, but we'll see about that part. Where like Aquashella is the one I really want to go to. So yeah, man. Let me answer Phil, Queasy? Is that supposed to be Queasy or is it Queasy? Regardless. Having a lot of green hair algae growth on wood in my tank. I'm thinking about dipping it in bleach solution to kill it and clean it off. Should I be worried about bleach getting into the wood? That's actually a really good question. So yes. The short answer is yes, you should be worried. What I would do instead of bleach is use hydrogen peroxide. And Ginger kind of already answered this, but I just want to reaffirm it. Hydrogen peroxide is really good at just putting the murder fest on algae, but is significantly safer because once hydrogen peroxide hits water, it immediately begins to break down safely into just oxygen particles and hydrogen particles. So it's very, very quickly safe. So you could literally take your piece of wood out, have a spray bottle full of hydrogen peroxide, and spray it over like you were misting a plant or something, right? Let that sit for 60 seconds. Like, it doesn't take long. And then dip it back in your tank, and it will immediately start breaking apart and be safe in the water. That happens very, very fast. Ooh, Rainbow Convention Fund. Jim's pushing. I've seriously been considering it. I actually talked on Thanksgiving. So I hope that answers your question, Phil. But on Thanksgiving, I was talking with my girlfriend because I was looking at like all the costs, and I think you guys will find this as funny as I do. I was laughing later down the road because everything was in showing its amount. It was like, oh man, my ticket's going to cost this much, and the hotel costs this much a night. Man, that seems like a really expensive hotel for out kind of in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's like 30 minutes away from Toronto proper, Canada. Like, that seems really expensive. And then I realized everything was in Canadian dollars and not USD. And so I hadn't applied the conversion rate yet. It's like, do the conversion rate. It's like, oh, never mind. That's much more affordable. It's just some of that. There's like the dumb thing. I was laughing at myself because I looked at it like the night before for this particular convention, which you have to find it on Facebook. Basically, put I'm sure if Candy's real crazy, she'll go try and hunt it down. But there is a rainbow fish convention that will be happening. It is small. Keep this in mind. Yeah, you could get an Airbnb. I don't know. I would, me personally, Jim, I would just stay at the same hotel because I'm that level of lazy. I just want to like go down to the lobby and be right where at my convention because I'm such a lazy person when it comes to going to conventions that while an Airbnb is significantly cheaper and might even be nicer, I would just stay in the hotel because it's like, I think it's like $80 a night after the conversion. It's like, that's not bad. If that's my, you know, one of my conventions that I choose to go to, like I might do two next year, and the only one that would qualify as two would be that Rainbow Fish convention. And that's because that's like purely for like the nerd Rainbow Fish person inside of me, as opposed to like where Aquashella, I want an opportunity to like go hang out with a lot of people who watch this channel but don't necessarily get to meet me in person, because like some people got to go to AGA. Well, that was like 220 people because they limit the stupid attendance. Speaking of Alex, I mentioned earlier. Alex, hello, good morning, my friend. But you know, it's like one of those things where I'm looking at that as possibly second. I am supposed to be getting a raise at work, and it will depend on how reasonable that raise is as to whether or not I can afford one convention or two next year. It's really what it comes back to. And yeah, that's the other thing. So like, Mike, you are hitting the nail on the head. I would want to go to a rainbow fish convention with the intention of bringing rainbow fish home, but then I have to bring rainbow fish home from Canada. And most of those don't necessarily have a full scientific name, so documenting them properly is a pain. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I've been to Canada a few times, especially when I was younger, and I I love Canadian currency, if only because the names just make me smile, like the loony and the toonie. Just, I don't know why. I don't know why they make me smile so much, but they do. And also just like the conversion rate's pretty good if you're in the United States right now. It's not as incredible as it was at one point. Like I remember when I was a kid, like it was basically 2 to 1, like $2 Canadian to a US dollar. It's significantly better now, which is good for Canada. Let's be fair here. But it's still like pretty favorable for us. Or like right now, a great example. I just had a friend come back from Japan. If you ever wanted to go to Japan, now is like the best time because the conversion rate is so friendly to those either with USD or Canadian dollars, just because of how the like exchange rates have gone. It's very, very cheap. An example would be for me to fly to Chicago. On like economy is something like $400. The same economy seat, which is actually a nicer seat because it's an international flight and it's on a much larger airplane. It's on a Dreamliner instead of 737. It'd be $700 to go to Japan. That's how good the exchange rate is right now. If you're ever looking at going to like Japan, for example, or like right, Joel Korososkin just came back from Denmark. It would cost him $400 to go to like Aquatic Experience, or it would cost him $400 to go to Denmark. Same economy air seat. And he got to go to Vivarium, which nobody in the US is going to Vivarium really. So he gets kind of a rare opportunity to see something that most of us in the United States are not seeing, and also document it and put it up on YouTube, which is pretty cool. It's like one of the interesting things about looking at air travel is just the cost in the United States. I don't know why it is so expensive. Where if you look at other countries, like international airlines, like the Japanese airline, the Hong Kong airline, any of the stuff in Europe, it's so significantly cheaper to bounce around between countries, which would be the same rough distance between going between some of the major states here in the U.S. But the U.S. is like god awfully expensive, and I really don't know why. Let's go to Denmark. I don't know that I want to go to Denmark. If I'm traveling out of the country, I've got some stuff way higher on my list than Denmark. I mean, don't get me wrong, Denmark's pretty and all, but Japan. I want to go to Japan eventually. I've made an agreement about Japan, so okay, we'll kill that tangent. So yeah, let us commence questions. Like, what questions do you guys have? I'd love to answer them, especially if it's about plants. I kind of want to do mostly plants this go around for the stream, but we can slide out of there and go real crazy if we really want to. If you want to talk rainbow fish, I'm never gonna say no. Montreal to Vancouver is $1,000. What the? Why? Just why? 800. We're $800 to Thailand. Now we're gonna talk airfare. This is just craziness. Like, is that from where you're at on the Virgin Islands, JH, or is that from like a major airport inside the U.S.? Does that include like coming from the Virgin Islands to here, or is that just straight from the Virgin Islands to Thailand? I'm not sure how flights work in and out of the Virgin Islands, hence why I ask. Let me answer that question for you, Alex. How is my Ludwigia Atlantis? Oh, yeah, Candy, you'd mentioned this. I'll get that in a second. My Atlantis is doing okay. I have done a major kind of overhaul of almost all the Ludwigias in my tank and have almost none of it left. Because it got crowded out by a bunch of Ludwigia repens because it just grows naturally faster. But yeah. I can eventually get it again. It's pretty easy to get because it's Atlantis at this point has been. It's technically a cross, if I remember correctly, when I was looking at some information from our horticulture awards chair, Roy. But it's still technically a different plant. So, I mean, it's cool. It's really cool if you get it, just because the color is so different. But I think I have like 2 stems of it left somewhere. I've got to like kind of propagate it out if I've decided to keep it. But yeah, like the super red and stuff like that, like just grows so much faster that it just like kicked its butt inside of there, and I was like, where's the Atlantis? Where has it gone? Okay, let us go. We're gonna first start with Eric Lucas, who has bipetshrimp.com is his channel, but he also, well, no, not his channel. That's his website. His channel is, I think, just his name, Eric Lucas. He does some occasional videos, and he has a store, which is really cool. But he was up here for AGA. He actually has really, really nice plants. In his case, he's collected quite a lot of rare boosts. And then he propagates all his boosts himself and sells it if it's not something that comes in a tissue culture or is more commonly available. So he's actually a really, really good source for boosts as far as kind of responsibly growing boosts. There are some questions about some other places about whether or not they're responsibly harvesting and collecting boosts and stuff like that, but that he's a pretty good source. So if you do like boost plants and you want to get something that has been very responsibly grown by a guy who really knows his stuff, Eric Lucas of bipetshrimp.com is actually a very, very good source. And he's a super nice dude. Well, he actually gave me, I can't remember, we traded some stuff at AGA. He does some crypts too. He's kind of a rare crypt hound as well. I gave him a piece of crypt Jacobsoni pink, which is relatively rare, although it's becoming far more common up here in the Seattle area just because enough of us have been growing it. And he gave me like a small hoard of tissue culture plants that he didn't want to take back when he was leaving out of AGA. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff in there. Well, there's a great example, like JH Aquatics. I don't know why this flagged you, but we'll fix that problem. Most of his boost and moss all comes from Eric Lucas. that should tell you he's a guy who does good stuff. Yeah, Aquatic Arts is another great one. That's somebody that Alex has worked with. They do all sorts of tank grown stuff. But yeah, you definitely have a bias. But I can vouch that, like, I've seen all the stuff that he has from Aquatic Arts in person. It's all very, very nice. So, there's lots of great stuff. But if you specifically, I'll talk specifically on Boost only because I know the man and have talked to him several times. I've traded plants with him a few times. If you want specifically responsibly grown Boosts, by petshrimp.com. That's Eric Lucas. He's actually a very, very good source. There's some others too that they're escaping my heads right now, but like I have some stuff that came from Karen Randall, and Karen Randall's like a real stickler about doing things responsibly, but then again, trying to get stuff from Karen Randall is a pain if you're not like in the right circle. Where thankfully I have a few friends up here who know Karen very, very well, so occasionally like she'll distribute a few plants to people. It's like, oh, this plant needs to be grown by some of the people who know what they're doing out in Seattle. And luckily some of those people will slide stuff my way too every once in a while. So kind of nice. Just take advantage of friends. It's really good. Can't buy from those where you are. Kathy, where are you? Are you in Canada? UK? I mean, there's tons of sources. It's all about knowing what source is local to you that does the best stuff. Can't have the blow dryers and drying dogs. Just turn the volume up. I mean, I guess I can move my mic a little bit. I was trying to keep it out of shot. Actually, eventually, I'm hoping next month I'll have a almost completely different live streaming rig, and it should sound significantly cleaner and louder. But we'll see. But yeah, a lot of times, like, hobbyists are actually your best buy. So there were a couple questions I want to scroll back and grab them because I would like to go through and answer them. There's one before Max Fish. If I come, there's free Nanky Swamps. Oh boy, trying to bribe me with fish. What a nice fella. All right, I guess I'm gonna do. So to DS, so how to become a master horticulturalist through GSAS. It's basically just a point game. So you're going to, every plant that you submit is worth a certain number of points, and almost every system does this, as far as like each club that has a good horticultural awards program. And then you're accumulating a certain number of points. In the case of ours at GSAS, it's 400 points to hit master. But things like a Rotala species are worth 5, to give you an example. Where like things that grow a lot slower, like an Anubias or a Crypt, are worth typically between 10 and 15. Flowering stuff, that becomes a little bit more, stuff like that. So it's all about kind of doing a bunch of stuff. Now, I have a Mr. B's question. It had to do with CO2. I gotta scroll back up and find it, because my chat keeps scrolling faster than I can. Okay. So I have CO2 at my disposal. Easy green and gravel, hard water, crappy lights. What plant do I recommend? So here's what I would look at. The plants that don't necessarily... So what you don't want to look at is a heavy root feeder. So you're going to kind of avoid crypts, for example. Swords I would kind of avoid, because those are going to put these like really huge root structures down, and they might not be able to do that efficiently in just standard gravel. But if you have CO2 and you want to grow some like really fun stuff, I would look at all of your Java ferns, Booses, Anubiases, anything that's an epiphyte. So anything that attaches to wood and rock and feeds off the water column. You actually you have basically what I would consider the perfect scenarios to do Java fern farming. And I actually have a video. I've filmed and edited it. Well, no, have I edited it? I'm in editing. Sorry, I'm still working on it. I was working on it last night. I didn't finish it because I got too tired. But I'm actually working on one for Plants for Profit about all the microsorghum species. So that's all your Java ferns. if you literally have like the kind of perfect setup where like a little bit of CO2, not the best light, and gravel, but you've got CO2 at your disposal, really, really good for doing things like that. So that's what I would look at. I would look at like some of the, especially you could look at some of the harder microsorghum species to get a hold of. An example would be like Singapore Dark or Thor's Hammer, which Thor's Hammer is becoming more common, but it's still kind of tough to get a hold of. Yeah, stuff like that. So that would be what I would shoot toward, or like some Anubiases, Boost, especially because Boost is just like a fire and forget. You just attach it somewhere, a little bit of CO2 is great, and it's all low light loving to begin with. Yeah, actually Alex just added another one that's pretty good. Bulbitis tends to not need a lot. Bulbitis will get big though, so make sure you have a tank that can handle it, which is why I tend to like, Java Fern, Boost, Anubias, these are all perfect. Just don't look at any of the white varieties for those plants, just because they are a highlight requirement. It's their only difference is they need highlight, but anything like Nana Petites, almost every Boost known to man, especially like the brownie species, I'll actually do well in low light. And then Java Fern I swear Java Fern doesn't care. I think you could almost keep it in the dark and it'd be okay. But great examples for you. Okay. I will get to Fisherman Fever's chat in a sec to answer that question, but I want to get one question before that. I feel like I missed something from Mr. Littles. There we go. Since I'm a master aquatic horticulturalist here, I will ask, any idea why my water wisteria has started to grow horizontal instead of vertical? Leaves yellow, so I'm thinking more nitrate. Recently just added crushed coral to the substrate and moved some things around. So yeah, if leaves are yellowing, that's a nitrate deficiency, almost always. Sometimes it will point to, I think it's boron? I'd have to look at my deficiency chart. The deficiency chart's your best friend. So one thing I would look at, Mr. Littles, is look up just plant deficiency chart in Google. It'll take you right to basically a picture. And I would seriously just bookmark it, print it, whatever you want to do. But it's a really good resource to like just at a quick glance go like, here's all the most common deficiencies and how to spot them. I keep that as a resource. I've committed most of it to memory based on my water, because there's a few of them that are not common to happen, but it's good to know. And it's one of those things that like I would highly recommend anybody pay attention to. Okay. This is actually a really good question. So Fisherman Fever, and then there's some others I'll have to scroll back up and grab too. But first off, thanks for the super chat. I really appreciate it, man. But what's a good source for beginners to identify plants? Great question. So sometimes for some of us, we'll get, we'll go to like an auction or someplace and we'll get a bag of random mystery plants. And who knows what they are? How do I identify these things? I think this is where it's hard and yet easy. So you can use things like there's several like Facebook type resources that are out there. There's like the planettank.net, the bar report, where they'll show you and teach you basics on plants. A lot of how you identify those plants are on leaf and stem structure. So like in general, a pogostemon is going to look kind of like this, where a hygrophila will look kind of like Y, and a rotala will look kind of like Z, all these kind of things. To learn those things, a lot of it is just looking at enough of those plants or handling enough of those plants in time. You just kind of get a feel for that. Where I would start looking is seriously YouTube. Like YouTube's probably your best friend. If you wanted to know like Rotala basics or Ludwigia basics or something like that, go watch those videos and watch how there's tons of people out there that teach about them, myself included. I think one of the better resources right now, is because he's been doing this more frequently, is going to be Corvus Oskin. So that's Joel. He's my buddy. He knows what he's doing. There's tons of people who talk about plants, and just look at how, when they're handling the plant and showing you some of the characteristics of the plant, just pay attention to those little things, like how the stem grows, what the stem looks like, and then how the leaf patterning grows, if that makes sense. So if you always have like row of leaves row of leaves, versus a leaf, a leaf, a leaf, a leaf, a leaf. Like each plant does it slightly different. So if you kind of start paying attention to a lot of those things, that will get you a good start as far as absorbing that information for yourself. Now, this is actually one of the other things I wanted to mention, and Alex has beat me to the punch in chat. So there is, from Dennerley, has an aquarium plants guide. They did a 2015 one, and I think they've done, haven't they done them already? I think they did like a 2017 one or something like that. But the 2015 one is really good because it has lots of photo resources for each plant. The other thing you could look for, there's like a massive, we'll call it a Bible almost, of aquarium plants from Crystal Castleman, that you can find that book on Amazon. But I think it's only in German on Amazon, if I remember right. That's the biggest problem with it. Let me see if I can I'll try and find it real fast. Because I know the book itself, and like you could use, an example would be like you could use Diana Wallstad's book to learn some of this stuff, but as far as identifying plants, the Dennerley one is really, really good. I actually have it downstairs. Oh, of course it's not going to show me what I want. That would be too easy. Thank you for not saying Google it. I mean, yeah, I'll have to find that book. I'll try to find Crystal Castleman's book. I had it somewhere and I linked it. Oh, you know what? I know where I linked it. Yeah, I would say that Underwater Gardens isn't as good for identifying plants, but it is a good book. It has lots of beautiful photography in it. There's the interview I did with Gary Lang from AGA. He actually got a copy of the book from Crystal in person, and I linked that exact thing in the description of that video. So I'll find it, and I will comment on this live stream after we're done with that book for anybody who's interested in it. But it is really, really good. And yeah, like the Dennerley Plant Guide, Co-op had them for a little bit, but there's like you can get it through other places because they sold out. That's actually a really, really great resource. So YouTube, Dennerley Plant Guide, and if you're really crazy, Crystal Castleman's like Ultra Bible on plants. It would be really great resources for you. Daryl Dimer, thank you, man. Well, I guess it's technically Deemer, isn't it? Everybody says Dimer, and it's so stuck in my head. But I know it's supposed to be Deemer. I'm sorry. But thank you. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. So I want to get the next question. Chat sometimes scrolls faster than my rambles can keep up with. Okay, yeah, this is one of the questions I saw. It's from Adam Johnson. Do you think it's possible to achieve master horticulturalist without CO2? And there was another question that I'll branch off of that came from Joseph about the how the program type thing I was talking about works, and I'll hit to that too. Bam, look at that. Candy, you're so good. You're too good at this. I don't know. It's like you've been hired to do this kind of stuff or something. So yes, let me answer that question. Yes, you can. All of the plants that I grew to get my first Master Aquatic Horticulturalist do not require CO2. They just require patience. And if we were to go and look through, like when Corey did the tour of my house, I think it's the only time we've looked at like all of my certificates up on my wall. You will see like the first Master Aquatic Horticulturalist and the second, there's a relatively large gap. And then you can see that they start coming significantly faster. And you can literally see when I start more actively using CO2 just to grow plants out versus when I wasn't using very much CO2 or was using no CO2. You can tell by how fast those start showing up. So, can you do it without CO2? Oh, heck yeah. Is it a lot faster with CO2? Oh, heck yeah. But, there's so many species of Anubias, so many species of Java fern, so many stems that do not require CO2 whatsoever. You can do it purely low light. You don't even have to go like medium or high light. There's plenty of plants to do it. It's just, do you have the time and patience for that one? $69 to ship? Holy moly. Kathy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that Canada gets like so little love from Amazon at times. That is brutal. Okay. So I want to branch off of that to a question from Joseph. So in like the Master Horticulturalist program that I'm kind of thinking about setting up, kind of like an online program. And I know this is like really long off because it would be like can I do this before the end of 2020? That would be cool. You can grow plants immersed. So it's the same as like my club in that regard. We do allow for immersed or submerged grown. However, part of like one of the changes I've been thinking about doing is doing something kind of special for people who master emergent grown plants versus submerged grown, because many plants are so much easier to grow immersed and so much more difficult to grow submerged as far as time is concerned, that like an example, in our breeding program, we have a special award just for people who culture a bunch of different live foods as a part of their breeding awards program. There's basically a live food culture certificate that comes as a subset to our breeding awards program. Even though all the live foods are considered part of our breeding awards program, there's a small like sub certification once you hit a number of points in that category where you get a little special one. So if you did, let's say you did a whole like maybe half of a master certification in just emergent grown plants, you would maybe see something like a side certification that said like, emergent plant growth master or something like that. Like these are little things that are like roll around in my head. And I'm just like fiddling with a coin that you probably just saw in my hand, but just kind of a heads up. Yeah. Like most programs allow you to grow either submerged or immersed. And it's kind of one of those things that I like, doing in general. Like I tend to do almost all submerged, but I think making sure that you identify some of that stuff, because like there are members of our club who are renowned basically for how good they are doing emergent growth. Let me look at. There's a question I'm going to get to, but there was something I want to. What justifies getting points for plants? Do you have to grow them for a certain amount of time? So, if you would look at gsas.org. So typically how most programs do it is propagation based. So let's say you start with 5 stems of a plant. Once you have successfully propagated it to where you have 10 stems, you've doubled the number of plants you have. And then in the case of rhizomes, there's a minimum length that you can cut the rhizome into to count. Some programs are more required to have pictures than others, as far as like uploading pictures if they're not verified by club members. For the most part, our club is like kind of on an honor system, because most of the people who are really growing plants, like they've done the stuff enough times, but like usually for like your first master, we kind of pay attention a little bit. We want like another member to verify some of your stuff, or just be able to be like, yeah, I've been talking to that person the whole time. I've seen stuff, or I've gone to their house or whatever. Most of it's an honor system. If you want to cheat to get a certificate that doesn't mean anything, I mean, go for it. But if you want to actually learn and earn why that certificate exists, the certificate doesn't like grant you some magical thing or anything. It's more about like having it's a recognition for kind of someone else telling you, yeah, like you've done enough of this stuff to where you've really figured this out, is really all it becomes. And me doing like an online program of any form is just a matter of letting other people participate in a similar program who don't have a local club that they can participate in. And there was a earlier question about like, how do I put together an aquatic club locally? And I know that like I'll miss some stuff in chat. I'm sorry. I can only keep up so well when I'm ramble. And as you guys know, I'm very long-winded. But my best answer to you on that one is actually to check out a video from Corey. So Aquarium Co-op, in one of his live streams, he talked about building, and if I remember right, it's a live stream. He talked about building, what it takes to like build a club or things like that. That's actually going to be a significantly better resource than I can ever give you, just because Corey has actually been on the board of a club. He knows what a lot of the stuff is like. I've seen some clubs get built up, stuff like that, but it was so well presented that I would direct you there. And I think it was a part of, might have been Real Fish Talk where they were talking about that. Candy might be able to correct me on that, but it was a really good live stream, and he talked specifically about building clubs, kind of similar when he started adding the club finder kind of on the Aquarium Co-op website. He had talked about it a little bit, and then started, that was shortly after he had started putting that on the website. So it's just one of those things where I would direct you there because that resource is really good. Now, we'll scroll back and we'll get the question that I've passed for a little bit. Let's make sure I didn't miss something else. Okay, so there's one from Desert Fishkeeper that I'm going to answer, and then I will get to Mark's question. So there's a question about identifying crypts. I will quote Karen Randall loosely, in that I can't remember her exact words, but basically the only way to properly identify a crypt is to have it immersed grown and wait for it to flower, and then the little pod that the actual flower sits in, because it's in this full encased thing, you have to slice it open with a razor blade and look inside at the flower, and that's the only way to truly identify which species of crypt it is. Fun, right? So how do we do that on the aquarium side? How do we identify crypts? We can get a loose idea of the type of species it is by looking at the leaf and the way it grows. We can't ever truly identify if it's a completely like, welcome to unknown red crypt Y. Like, you're never going to perfectly identify. Your best bet is it's probably a Wendetii red of some form, because those are the most common. Or does it grow really tall? Oh, it's probably more likely to be this. Does it have a short, much more broad, wide leaf? It's more likely to be this. Like, there's some things that, of the ones that are common in the hobby, we can identify certain things. But to get a perfect answer, the only way to perfectly identify a crypt is to have it immersed grown, have it flower, slice into the flower pod so you can actually see the stamen inside and the true flower itself inside. And then, based on its color and the way it grows, you can tell exactly which species of crypt it is. That's from Karen Randall and Crystal Castleman. That's the only way to truly identify each crypt from a different crypt. Which sucks for us in the hobby, because almost no crypts will flower underwater. Some do. And in rare circumstances they will. It can be done, but it's hard. But yeah. So a lot of times, like, most of them are Wendetii eyes. You could look at leaf shape. A great thing, again, you go back to like that Dennerle plant guide. If you're willing to spend the atrocious amount of shipping because of the German government, looking at chat, Crystal Castleman's phenomenal book. And kind of the way you get around that is, apparently, if you're Gary Lang, Crystal will deliver you one by hand. But for the rest of us, we have to pay like $60-something to ship the dang thing. And that's apparently some kind of tax that the German government does, which is fun. I would not say fun, but yeah, fun. But, you know, there are resources out there that let us look at the leaf shape and stuff. And then from there, we can generally guess the color, if it's a color variety. So, like, in the case of Wendetii eyes, right, they all kind of grow the same, and then we can look at colors and kind of figure out which one is which. And as for Mr. B, no, it's not necessarily because they grow different in every tank. It's because the actual plants are so similar in appearance, and they will, depending on their nutrients, grow or light, have different coloration. So yes, I guess technically they're different in every tank, but it's more just that, like, to truly scientifically identify them, it is done by the flower, because that's the one where every flower, in the case of crypts, is unique species to species. And that includes, like, the variations where, like, what we would call Wendetii red versus Wendetii bronze versus Tropica versus. There's millions of Wendetii eyes. Me, Oya, green gecko, green, blah, 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 blah. The way that we really know is by looking at the flower, because each of them has a unique looking flower when they flower. So that's the tough part when it comes to crypts. And to answer you, like Mr. B, yeah, it's kind of a pain in that there's a lot of honor system. However, like the way that you would efficiently do that in like an online system would be based on pictures. So someone would, and again, like you could spoof the picture if you really wanted to, but you would show like, here's how many I had at the start, and you would have it dated, like you know, like a piece of paper in the frame or whatever that shows like on this date is when I first got it, and then you would show like here's my first propagation, and you'd show that like there's twice as many of them now with a new date in the picture, something like that. Like that's probably the smartest way to do it. This is all stuff that I would have to work out to actually do this system, but yeah. So we'll there's some hurdles, so to speak. Go hunt down. All right, Mark. So currently have hornwort, guppy grass, sage, water sprite, pearlweed, java moss, etc. All doing well. Have medium light, low tech setup. What are some good next level plants? And I want to take a second to pin off of this pearlweed. Somebody asked earlier if pearlweed is a high light plant, and I would say no, but yes. In that, I would say it's a medium light plant in order to do well. If you're trying to keep it like really short, more carpety, and not let it like grow out to a stem length where it's several inches long, then yeah, you would want really high light, and you just have to trim it like crazy. But if you're trying to just grow it in like a short stem where it's, you know, a few inches long and there's a big field of it, your medium light will suffice. It's all about making sure that it's not getting shaded. If it's getting shaded by taller plants, that's when pearlweed tends to struggle. So kind of a low tech setup, but medium light. So we're not doing CO2, but we're doing medium light. What are some good next level plants? Okay. So some of my favorites, as far as stuff that will not be too crazy, but can do pretty well in what you're looking at. I would look at like some of the Ludwigia species, and not necessarily just repens, but I would look for like repens cross arcuata or arcuata cross repens. They're the same plant. It's a naturally occurring hybrid. It has a smaller leaf shape instead of the big broad leaves of repens. It has this small kind of like spade shape almost. Well, more like a spearhead shape than a spade. It gets a lovely red color under good light, and with CO2 it'll get very intense red color, but without CO2 it can still get a nice red color to it. Very, very pretty plant. Not difficult, but it favors good light and reasonable fertilizer in the water column, which is sounding, with all your stuff doing really well, sounds like you've got that on lock. And the next one you could look for is Rotala rotundifolia. There's like what they call indica. Like it's not true Rotala indica. That's what we know as Rotala bonsai. But it's a fast-growing plant. It's pretty simple, but it gets a lovely kind of golden yellow color as you get toward the very top surface of the water. So as it gets closer to that light and absorbs more of that light, it's going to get this really pretty golden yellow color, and the rest of it will be kind of a nice limeish green color. That's a plant that I think is really, really good and brings a little like different color than just your generic green to you. If you want to try something that's a little, how should I put this? Not difficult, but just a little different color variation. There's lots of hygrophilas you can look at. I will like preach all day long that Hygrophila species green olive, if you can find it, is an amazing plant because it's super dark green, and that makes all of your bright greens really pop. Or you can use it almost like a more central plant, because you'll see all this bright green and you'll see this spot where there's this dark olive green to it, and that's really eye-catching when it sits beside some of like your java ferns or your pearlweeds, these things that have that nice typical bright green that we see in aquarium plants. Having those few plants that aren't very common in that dark green really make those things pop, but then also draw their own attention because it's a color we don't normally see. And the fish like just pop off the top of it even more because that dark green with the bright green creates this nice little wall, and then any color in your fish, if you've got like cardinal tetra or something like that, you can't possibly miss the fish. It's nice, nice, nice. So those are a couple options I would look into. Gives you a little bit of color variety. So you got some red, some yellow, and then like a very different green than what you're getting in most of your normal plants. The only other thing you could look at that is really good in a low-tech setup, if you can find them outside of a tissue culture. In a tissue culture, it's a little tougher. Look for Echinodorus Flame. It's also called the Purple Knight Sword. I keep some in a 20 long right over there. It has never had CO2. It has medium light, and its every leaf is always purple, dark royal purple. It doesn't get very tall. It's an extremely slow grower. Don't expect to propagate it anytime soon, but it's a super, super pretty plant. And there was a question like, Adrian, if you're still in here, do I sell my guppies? Yes and no. Let me explain. I get this question a lot, so I'm super used to answering it. It's just kind of the thing when Corey shows your guppies off. But I sell my guppies, but the problem is it's really hard for me to ship given my work schedule and to do everything efficiently, because when you're shipping fish, it takes a long time to pack. And typically what I'm doing is I would have to take an entire day off of work and be down in my fish room at like 4 a.m. because of the number. That's just how many people I have to ship for when I do ship. And I'm basically bagging fish until noon and then shipping. And I will only ship on a Monday because I want to do it like the safest way possible to make sure that it gets to people. So I do ship, but it's tough just with my work schedule. Like, I don't tend to have a lot of free time in my schedule. I work something like 55 to 60 hours a week. I go to work before the post office opens. I get off of work after the post office closes, and I would never want to have fish just sitting in my car waiting for me to go at lunch because of the number of boxes I have to take. It's not good for the fish. But in the case of people who are local, like I had somebody drive up from Seaside, Oregon. It was 4 hours each way to pick up guppies, which, Julie, if you're watching, hello. But so like I can sell to people who are local or are willing to make a 4 hour each way drive in her case. But it's just one of those things where my schedule is super, super busy between work and YouTube stuff. So it becomes very hard. I have been trying to find a way. I tried talking to like Bob Steenfott, for example, who's opened his own business, but he's kind of having his own stuff here and there, where it's just like to meet his own demands, it's a little hard to take on another fish until he can expand a little more. I think when he expands a little more, we might have a more in-depth conversation about him potentially being the person who like sells basically my fish, to make it a little more common. And that's kind of where I stand right now. It's do I sell fish? Yes. Is it hard for me to ship? Extremely, just because of my schedule. And that's really what it comes down to. So watch, if you want to, really, if you are very, very serious about getting the guppies that I have, just watch my community tab. The next time I'm going to sell them, when I can create a window to ship, I will announce something about a month out there. It gives you plenty of time to have a tank ready, to get in contact with me, because typically it's going to be like, I'm going to do fish, shoot me an email. And then from there, we get everything wired out. Unlike, there are some other people who have the same strain that are selling them. I don't know if Bob Kaler is selling his yet, but Kaler's Aquatics has that fish and has been growing them very well. There are some other people who have the strain from a different source, which I think it's like Fancy Tail Aquatics, for example. But some of those guys, because it's kind of hard to get a hold of those guppies, they might charge a lot more than, say, I would the few times I ship. Part of why like my price tends to be pretty fair on them is because I can't ship very often. So when I do, I try to make sure it's a good deal for everybody, because y'all are really patient. And the people who wait, like, I mean, an example, it's not the guppies, but who I like to call my Shelly superfan, Sean, he waited, I think, 9.5 months until I could finally ship him some Shellys, because he'd been waiting for Shellys. He's just an area where it's hard to get them. I even had contacted him ahead of time. I was like, hey man, I know we had agreed upon this price. I want to sell them to you a little cheaper, just because he was like, no, you're saving me a trip to Chicago, dude. It's fine. But in that case, it's like, that's just kind of how I work. I don't do this for money so much, if that makes sense. Like when I sell fish, I care more about them going into good hands than I do about trying to make as much money as possible. I've got to make some to make up for the fact that I'm taking an entire day off of work. But yeah, I'm not trying to be greedy about it, if that makes sense. So yes, do I sell fish? Yes. It's me being able to ship them is the trouble, and I've been trying to find options that will make that easier. Because if I could just say like, hey, if you want to get my fish, you just go to person X on their web store or their website or whatever, and they'll have stock as soon as I can get them to them, or however it's working. I would much rather do that because I'd rather make it something that's more commonly available, because I really want that fish to persist in our hobby and not disappear, because it's a super, super pretty guppy. And it's probably like the best blue of a Moscow you're ever going to get. So there's the rant on that. Joel, hello. I've talked about you like 6 or 7 times. Welcome. I was expecting me to send you guppies. If you went to AGA, you could have got them free. I have an army of comments. I knew there was another question I missed. Okay, yeah. From Preston John. Will Boos flower underwater? I have a few with buds now. Should they move closer to the top? So, when it gets that bud, Preston, that is the flower as far as we're concerned. The only way you see the actual, like, the flower and the stamen is you have to slice that little bud pod open. It doesn't actually open up like we would think of a more terrestrial flower will. It stays inside that kind of pod type thing, if that makes sense. Or sorry, that's a crypt. Boos will have that pod, and it will it'll open, and you'll see what looks kind of like a cup with a ball sitting over the top of it. That's when it's at full bloom. It doesn't have to go higher or closer to the water surface. That's just how their flowers look. They will flower underwater. It only stays in that state for about 2 or 3 days typically, and then it'll go away. But that bud will sit there for a significantly longer period of time, depending just on how the plant decides it wants to do things. I was at AGA. Where's the guppies? You didn't come ask me for guppies, man. You know better. You can just ask me for guppies if you want them. You know better. You just drive over. But yeah, so Boos, in the case of crypts, like crypts can flower underwater as well. It's much harder than a Boos. Boos will flower underwater. It's one of the few plants that will truly flower underwater. And then crypts, you literally have like a pod, it's a very similar kind of pod looking structure to the Boos, but you actually have to slice it open. Yeah, which sucks. Where like there is a lily species that will like full open as a flower underwater, and it looks really, really, really credible. So, yeah. Pictures of the sections. No, so like JH, if we were to do that program online, it would literally be, you would show pictures of the first planting, right, to show however many stems you plant. In the case, let's start with a stem plant to show how many stems you planted, and then you'd clip them and replant them, and have a second side-by-side picture that shows like, the cut point and new growth starting on the cuts, and then how the cut ones have established and started some kind of new growth. That's really all you'd have to do. It's pretty simple. It's not too complicated. You don't want to do too crazy, because then you want this to be accessible to people. Really, like any master aquatic horticulturalist program of any form is more about getting people to like kind of learn the process of plants. Because like once that's internalized in you, it doesn't matter how many times you do master horticulturalist, whether it's one, or if you're in my case, you're like the crazy person who does it 6, 7, 8 times. It's just because you decided to keep tracking all of those things instead of like, yeah, I've done it once, that's good. Like a great example, Joel has easily grown as many, if not more, plants than I ever have, and as far as I know, I don't think he has it all registered with Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, but he's easily as knowledgeable on plants as I am, easily, without doubt. And so it's not a matter of like, for some people really want that piece of paper, right? That kind of thing to know, like I've done this level of qualification. I've kind of learned enough, and this program helps me know when I've hit that point. It's more about trying to encourage people to do that much stuff so that they get to that point of where, like, from maybe some other standard, they'll know that, like, this is kind of what I need to do to understand, like, what it is to become that level of understanding of plants. It's not necessarily like if I give you some certificate that says you're a master aquatic horticulturalist, that's not going to be something that you go to, like, Tropica and be like, hey, I've got this certification from this one random fat guy on the internet. It's not gonna like open some avenue of employment or anything, but it's more like a way to look at some kind of set program from someone else and understand that, like, if you have done this much stuff, you have the understanding necessary to be considered in that kind of vein of, like, you've mastered aquatic plants. And, like, you could also go from the very Musashi Miyamoto, that no one ever masters anything, or that in order to master one thing, you must master everything. There's all sorts of crazy things like that. But yeah, I mean, like, an example, like Alex has hit master horticulturalist, and he's still growing more stuff, but he's not tracking it anymore because, like, he's not the psycho like me who wants to see if you could just break the system at this point. If they eventually just give up and go, like, look, man, stop submitting stuff. We don't want to keep printing pieces of paper for you. I'm trying to get my chairperson to just break down and ask me to stop, is basically what it comes down to. But yeah. And that's one thing, is, like, you could take this on a higher level, and very much what you're saying, Joseph, is, like, the opportunity to look at what other people in the program are doing. So, like, in my club, for example, I can look at what everything everyone has ever grown in our history, and I can try to, like, contact that member if I have their information or meet them at a meeting, and just like, hey, are you still growing this plant? I really like to grow it. Or, like, maybe I'm having trouble with a certain plant. I can look at people who've been successful with it and ask them questions about it. It's one of those things where, like, I think that would be the more interesting part of doing some kind of online program, is the ability to potentially contact other members of that program, and whether it's trade plants or learn from them about a plant, or pick up plants from them. So, like, maybe you're in an area where it's really hard to get certain species of plants, and that Joseph guy is growing that really cool hygrophila that you want. It might be an opportunity to reach out to other people and get some plants. Who knows? Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that has to be planned. And, like, one of those, I've got a few heads I want to kind of, like, go talk to, in order to see if what's in my head is actually viable and possible. It's some of it requires some tech. I'd probably have to build some kind of server system somewhere for a lot of that, as opposed to, or rent it or something like that, just to do it correctly. But yeah, it's one of those things where it is in very infant stages, in that I have an idea and I need to talk to a few people and then probably work out some tech side things. Hence why I say I'm hoping maybe end of 2020 I can unveil this program. AKA, I think I need about a year to do it right. Ginger, I spent way too much money on plants, and I blame Bentley. I don't ever think there's too much money on a single plant, but I think overall, as long as you're having fun, there's no such thing as too much money. In the words of my great grandmother, it is only money. Having who is it? Jimmy's video. Is it Mr. Brown's Goldies? Yeah, he had this great quote, and it sticks with me today, where he was talking about how he's rich with joy. And that he says, I'm rich with joy. And that kind of mentality, that kind of ideal, means so much more to me than one might think. Like, yeah, monetary wealth is nice, but if you're not happy, who cares? I mean, yeah, you could argue that money buys you happiness, but I know plenty of people that have significantly more money than me that are miserable. And in my case, I would generally like to think that I'm a pretty happy guy. We all have our bad days, we all have our good days, but overall, I tend to be a pretty happy dude. And I know plenty of people with a lot more money than me and a lot more like financial security, if you will, and they're miserable because they don't have that thing that brings them that kind of joy. Where like for me, I could I've told my girlfriend this and she looks at me like I'm crazy when I say this, but I could live in the akin of like a hotel room as far as a living space is concerned, which kind of my like bedroom in my house looks like a hotel room. It's at one point I will have to walk you guys through this because it's kind of comical when I have it not in disaster area status right now, but I could live in like a hotel room as far as like space needed, as long as I had a separate facility for all my fish and was perfectly fine. Like I don't need a massive house. I'd be that person who would want like a 1-bedroom apartment and then like a 2,000 square foot fish facility rather than a huge house or something. It's so weird. Like the things that would make me happy have so little to do with what most people view. And I think it comes down to that, like, understanding what makes you happy and then running with it. Like, what makes you happy in life. I can remember after I'll give you some insight into who I am as a person. After a breakup with my ex-girlfriend, my last girlfriend before my current one, who I'm very, very happy with, I had, like, a 3-day period where I was in kind of like the worst mental rut I'd been in an extremely long time. And I sat down because I'm a very analytical person, and I basically broke my life apart in my brain and started asking myself this question of like, well, is it her that made me super happy, or is it is that just a piece of the puzzle, and can I figure out like the quote at that time happiest time of my life, which is no longer the happiest time of my life but was then, like, can I figure out why that was the happiest time of my life and just strive back toward it. And it took me like a day of like literally just sitting here at my desk. I had some music on in the background and was just staring at a blank computer screen thinking. And I figured it all out. And like the short answer was like it had to do with a certain like collection of things. And this sounds super crazy, but I figured out the things I needed in order to be happy. And I've never looked back since. And this was, I think, 5 years ago now. And like, I have easily gotten back to that point and surpassed it without even blinking an eye. Like in my current situation, I have things in the case of my fish that bring me quite a lot of peace and enjoyment. I have a roof over my head. I have the ability to have a meal when I need it so that I'm not like starving. And I have somebody who makes me extremely happy, and that's really all I need. I have work that, while stressful, allows me to keep doing those things and give myself the few things that I need in life. Like I'm pretty minimalist in the sense of like the number of things I need. Like I drive a 15-year-old car and don't care. Like it still gets me where I need to go. Those kind of things. Like once you find what makes you happy, that feeling, that kind of like richness with joy, whew, that's so much better than almost anything else. Finding those things that make you happy in life and just getting the most out of those matters so much more than anything else. And once you figure that out, like you'll get people. I think one of the best things for me, there's some guy who left a horrible comment earlier that got auto hidden by YouTube's magical algorithms, which thank you YouTube for being smart. And Candy even laughed at it. But like, if you guys had seen what that person wrote, you would know that is a miserable person. The person who just is not enjoying their life. Where like me, I could look at it and laugh at it. Why? Because that can't possibly impact my life. Because I'm very happy. So like, I think every live stream I've had some random philosophical tangent I've gone into. Now that I think back on it, because like last time was about It's like, how to pick fish, I think was the one that I went on, where it's like I went on some long tangent about, and it was like a mental philosophy or something like that. I know you guys. It is amazing that you guys put up with me. There are 74 of you apparently currently here while I'm babbling about this. If YouTube stats are right, it's like, man. But yeah, it's interesting how people choose to live their lives, and if you took any advice from me that had to do with anything non-aquatic, my simple thing would be find what makes you happy and pursue it. Because if you can be happy despite your income, Joel, dude, I'll totally tell you after stream. I got you, buddy. Don't worry about it. I do have one question I have to answer, and since he's just joined chat, I'm going to answer it now. I've been putting it off, almost on purpose. So I got one question that came from the community tab, and this will be not the last question I answer, but the only community tab question. Bam. From VB23. Welcome to chat, buddy. Opinions on Osmocote root tabs when used appropriately and when you ignore the fact that it can cause problems. Okay. I'm gonna digest this question, and you might not like the answer. So here's the thing. Opinions on Osmocote root tabs when used appropriately. I'm gonna split that into a separate question. When you ignore the fact that it can cause problems, I will never do that. Nor should you. If there are known problems, even outside of aquatics, if there is a known issue, even if it's slight 1-2%, always keep those in mind. Never ignore them. Because if you ignore them and you become that minor case where it affects you, it's the worst feeling in the world. Trust me, I know. Not in aquatics. I've had this happen in other places in my life. When I was younger and dumber, we'll put it that way. When I had not learned the lessons I have learned as an older man, aka when I hadn't screwed up so much that I'd finally figured it out. So, opinions on Osmocote root tabs when used appropriately. So if you're using an immersed growth setup where they are not completely underwater and you have no livestock, they're phenomenal. If you want to use them in a fully flooded aquarium, just don't. I know they're cheap, and I know that's why most people want to go to them, but you know what? 40 Seachem root tabs off of Amazon, if you watch, are not that expensive. There are lots of other places that make a dedicated for the aquarium root tab that does not have the built-in ammonia that Osmocote does, because Osmocote is designed for terrestrial plants. It is not designed for aquarium plants. You will not have that risk in the first place, and often they actually have a better nutrient balance because they're designed for aquarium plants. There are lots of better things out there. Some are very cheap, some are not. A great example, A Gamer's Wife just did a root tab comparison video. Do you know which root tab was the best out of the ones she tested? Seachem. The difference was small, but Seachem performed better. And they're not expensive. A bag of 40 is like $16, and you really only need one root tab every 6 inches of square, 6 by 6. You don't need a lot. And you could even, in theory, if you really took the time, break those down and put them in a smaller zone, or spread them to where it's one root tab under each major plant. But you don't need many of them. So this is where you might not like this answer, in that I'm going to tell you, just freaking don't. Don't. You can, and if you make a mistake, it'll feel like the worst mistake ever. But don't. One thing that I think is a rampant problem in American consumerism as a general statement, and you can take this how you want, is the pursuance of cheapness. Getting a good deal is so often seen more important than getting a quality product. If there is one thing I have learned in life when it comes to buying stuff, I have never regretted buying quality and spending a little extra money over buying something cheap. Because quality has always lasted me longer or performed better. Every time. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, as Mr. B, you might be hitting it right on the head. Like, so, only use Tasman fertilizers designed for an aquarium. Seems simple, doesn't it? I mean, the thing is, there's lots of people online who use Osmocote. But for every 20 stories I see that love Osmocote root tabs, I will see that one horror story. That's 5%. I don't like 5% failure rate. No. I come from professional testing for a living. If I see 1% failure rate, I'm not happy. Now, most places will look at 5% as an acceptable deviation. But sometimes, man, that's such a great statement. Mr. B is like secret wisdom. He doesn't know it. Cheaper is not always less expensive. A lot of times, that cheaper item doesn't last as long, breaks easier, all that kind of stuff, and you'll have to keep replacing it. Like, we say this a lot in lights, and I think, thankfully, most people are smart about this when it comes to aquarium lights. I mean, we'll complain we don't want to spend $200 for an aquarium light. I totally get it. Or more, in the case of, like, you know, ONF and some of that really fancy stuff out there where it's like, you want how much for that light? And it only covers a 2-foot area? Ooh, good Lord. But those things, often you get what you pay for, is the most truest statement known to man. I've said this many times in my professional career when I've seen test managers who have said, you know what, it would be so much cheaper for us to move all of our staff to India or China or whatever. And it's like, yeah, it will be cheaper. You get what you pay for in quality. Quality matters. And anything that you truly want to enjoy and love, like a hobby like this, patience, waiting a little bit longer to get much better quality is always worth it. Always. And sometimes, like, where we want to rush for the fastest version of something, right? Maybe you want something quicker, or it's easier to do something faster by doing X, Y, or Z. But there's always a risk involved when you do that. And I personally prefer to avoid those risks when possible. Have I done stuff faster than I should have? Of course. And have I, like, had some risks associated with it? Yeah. Yes, I have. There's another great question, which we talked about this actually, VB, and I want to answer it more in depth now that I'm on stream. You'd asked about, like, instantly cycling an aquarium by transferring a filter that is already cycled to a new tank, right? So most of the time when we talk about, like, cycling something, we're looking at is the beneficial bacteria culture in the filter built up. But true cycles, like a truly cycled tank, would involve all of those things, like that culture being built up on, like, the glass surface, the plants, the substrate, all that kind of stuff. So does it instantly cycle the filter? Yes. Does it instantly cycle the tank? Technically, no. Things like that, right? Where there's parts of this as a patience game. And it's all about how much risk are you willing to take for speed versus would you rather play it safe, wait a little bit longer, and just have the least possible risk. And, like, yeah, I mean, a lot of society nowadays, we're moving so fast, we're cranking along so quick, we're doing all these things that we want stuff now. And believe me, I have been the massive victim of that often, where it's like, I have seen something I wanted, and I wanted it then and now. And I've even broken my own rules in a couple of cases. I'll fully admit it. Like, we all do it, right? We all do it. But you just have to tell yourself each time whether or not you want to wait just that little bit longer to play it safe, or whether you are willing to take that risk and do it now. And that comes in everything. And as far as like how often you add root tabs, to kind of answer fully on that, it really does depend on the plant you're trying to feed, but typically you can do a root tab every 2 to 3 months in a low-tech setup. If you have a lot of CO2 where it's going to absorb nutrients significantly faster, it could be as quick as once a month. If you have a massive, massive plant, like a huge Madagascar lace that is always big and always producing lots of new leaves and flowering, or is a big sword that's growing like crazy, you might need one once a month, because the root ball is so big that it absorbs that many nutrients, and that plant is so huge. But if you were like starting off with crypts or something like that, once every 2 to 3 months is usually fine. You don't have to have like a perfect continuous nutrient source right there. Every aquatic plant will eventually take their nutrients from the water column. Just some do better pulling it from something like a root tab. I often will use root tabs just to start a project when I'm just kicking things off, and then I will let them over time convert to getting used to only water column nutrients, because I'll always be dosing there. But those tabs are just there at the start, and then they convert and they're fine. So that's kind of thing. I use tabs to start aquariums with heavy root feeders, and I get them to slowly convert into a water column feeder over time. However, in some cases you might have like really big swords or something like that. It's good to give them a root tab every couple months, at least, if they're fairly big. Sometimes it can be as fast as once a month. It all depends on, just monitor your growth, monitor your plant. Is it not growing as fast as it used to be a month ago, 2 months ago? Maybe it's time to put another root tab down there. And it's kind of like, yeah, there's like the dirted method versus the Wallstead method. Like you could do it like 1,000 different ways to look at this kind of approach, but all of them are kind of answering the same generic overarching idea in different ways. And yes, dirted tanks can be awesome. Can be. But if you're somebody like me, like I mess with plants often, so if I'm like constantly moving plants around, a dirted tank is like the worst thing in the world for me, because I'm going to make an absolute mess inside of my tank, even if I cap it, because I'm screwing with them too much. That's the way that I do my aquatics. Now, me personally, I love things that are convenience. Convenience is my thing. So if it's designed for an aquarium, I'll pay that extra money for the convenience factor, because I have a strict schedule of time, and if I can make things easier, that's what I shoot for. Oh, I totally missed that current question earlier. Thank you, Russell, for bringing that back up. I'll answer that in just a second. I'm going to answer Mike's question, and then I'll talk about the current lights. And then we'll probably be toward the end of the stream. Is there any secret to getting dwarf Sagittaria to grow faster? I have passive CO2 with medium to high light, and use root tabs, liquid fertilization. The plant is around 5 months old and only a few runners. So what I have noticed, and maybe this is indirectly answering your question, because a scientific answer to that I could not give you, because I simply don't know. It's not a type of plant I grow a ton of. But I have noticed in things like Jungle Val, Vesuvius, Pygmy Chainsword, so similar style plants, I have, in my experience, had them typically grow very slow until they hit some unknown magical like explosion point, and then they go crazy. And I have typically seen that take about 6 months. Funny you should mention that you're at 5 months, because I have typically seen them kind of take their time until 6 months and then just take off, and I've done nothing different the entire time. So I think for most of it, it's kind of like a hitting a takeoff point, so to speak, where that plant finally decides, now I'm happy, now I've got everything I need, I'm just going to go hog wild and go nuts. And it could be seasonal. Very much could have some seasonal effectance to it. I don't know from a scientific perspective. It's just my kind of understanding of how things have happened to work, where they just take their time to settle in, and then once they decide they're going to take off, they go gangbusters on you and all grow almost uncontrollably. So I hope that helps a little bit, Mike. I mean, Daniel Fish Keeping is kind of adding some extra info along those lines, but hopefully that shall help. Okay. Have I ever used current satellite lights? If so, are they good for low to medium light plants? So I've had a current that I borrowed from a friend for a while because I wanted to look at them. I have not done in-depth testing on them. My qualms with current lights are that I think they're a little too expensive for what you get. Are they good for medium to low light? Yeah, they should be fine. I think that there are better lights out there, clearly, and you could almost argue that I have a bias toward like the fluval lights, but I've had such success with them that I can't help but kind of preach that how good they are for their price point. Where like, currents, there's a couple different ones, like the satellite, if I remember, is just white and blue, right? And then there's a different one that has a little bit more spectrum to it, but they are sufficient. My risk thing that I would pay attention to is that in my experience through several friends and reading a million horror stories online, satellites have a much heavier blue spectrum to them in general, and it can cause significantly additional algae growth. So you might find yourself fighting a lot more algae until you've balanced your tank out really, really well. So getting like that long green hair algae and stuff like that might be something that's a little more common to you under a current satellite because the blue spectrum is a lot stronger in those particular lights. But overall, I think if you're going low to medium light, yes, they are a substantive light in that they will do the trick. But there's lots of people who will preach that you can only have success with a current light, and there are people like me who will tell you I'm not impressed, but it will do the trick. I'm also like there are people who love Aquanites and think that the beamswork suck, where I think the beamswork is a really good cheap light, but you have to understand it is a cheap light and you're only going to get so much out of it, right? When I bought a couple of my first tanks when I was on a bit more of a budget, I bought beamsworks and I've had great success with them. Would I do the same now, or would I just wait longer and buy a fluval? I would just wait longer and buy a fluval, but that's based on my current experience. Or you could go real crazy and look at like Kessel, but those things are god awfully expensive. And then there's significantly worse than them too. Don't get me wrong. You could look at like in the European aquascaping scene, we look at things like Green Aqua never uses a fluval light. Well, yeah, but Green Aqua doesn't care what it costs. They do things for performance. They're a like art gallery of an aquarium place. They don't care about costs. You and me, fish keepers, like more average fish keepers, we care about not spending $500 a light to cover 2 square foot of area. It's like, whoo, where like they'll get all sorts of crazy like ADA or UNS Titans or whatever. Like you pick your poison of the ONF flat ones, all those like super nice, expensive lights. Those are people who don't care. And if you don't care about cost, man, by all means, go nuts. Those things are crazy good. But I ain't rolling that deep, man. I've got some just to test in the testing lab. I know we've made space. Now I got to get tanks down there. I'm past the like my plumbing exploding in my walls. My budget is screwed time. I can now afford to go buy on dollar per gallon or 50% off 40 breeders. As sad as that is to say, to set up testing lab. But like, yeah, that would just be my thing. Are they sufficient? Yes. Can they do the trick at low and medium light? Yeah, certainly. Just be prepared for a little more algae and or get lots of fast growing nitrate hog type plants in order to take up that stuff so that the algae doesn't have a chance to settle in the first place, and you should be okay. Okay, there's one more question I want to answer, and then okay, make that 2 because this one's fast, and then I'll talk substrate. So from Geekalotl, which is such a great name, by the way. What is a good nanolight for a 5-gallon for a planted light? There are 2 different ones that I would generally look at that I think are really good, and there are some other cheap options that you can look at too. But so if you want like kind of the nicer ones, there's the Phoenix clip-on light is actually pretty nice. Or you could look at the Fluval 3.0 Nano light. That's also really, really good because it gives you all the program control and everything. It's a little more expensive, admittedly, just like the fluvals are compared to, say, like a Beams Work or something like that. They're a little more expensive, but it gives you all the same control as the fluval plant lights because it uses the exact same application and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, just keep that in mind that you can look at those. Now, if you want something cheaper, there is a light that I've been using, and I don't know if they have one for a 5-gallon, but I would imagine they do, called the Pawfly on Amazon. Let me see if I can find one real fast. We'll see if they have one smaller. I have it on the shallow tank, which I've been really, really impressed with it, actually, just as far as what it can do. So it's like 18 to 24 inch light. It might be too big, actually. There's a smaller night crew that's out there too, which I've seen a lot of people really like. Okay, yeah, this might be too big for a 5-gallon because it's 18 to 24 inches. But there are a couple things, and yes, Candy's mentioned that. I do have to disclosure. I am an affiliate of the Aquarium Co-op until the end of this year when they end their affiliate program. So if you do happen to buy something from the Aquarium Co-op, like that clip-on Phoenix light or like the Fluval Nano light, I do get a small commission. It goes to the channel. I have to do that for FTC rules. Blah, 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 blah. Good old FTC, the part that everybody's not losing their mind about. They're losing their mind over COPPA, even though the likeliness of COPPA affecting people like me is extremely low. So yeah, let me talk substrate because I saw from Fish Dreams. Yeah, okay. So I like mixing substrate, but in general, I think that the substrates I tend to like, I'm very soon going to be testing a new substrate from a company that is really popular for shrimp stuff. So you can figure that out, but I don't want to reveal it yet. But I've tended to like mixing Echo Complete with Fluval Stratum. In general, I just think that that's really, really efficient. And I typically do like one large bag to one large bag, so it's not like anything crazy about its mixture. It's just, and you can do any other similar stuff. So Fluval Stratum is roughly equivalent to the Brightwell. It's roughly equivalent to ADA Amazonia. Any of those kind of small clay ball style substrates, they're all roughly the same. They're all fairly similar in how they're designed. So yeah, there's that. Like Brightwell makes a nice one. The nice thing about Brightwell in particular, if you're curious, is that Brightwell, unlike Fluval and especially ADA does this a lot, doesn't put off ammonia initially. So you won't use it to speed up the like fishless cycle by having the ammonia kind of come out of your substrate. You can do it other ways, of course, but you can add things more quickly because it's designed to be kind of a quick start for shrimp and a buffer down for using shrimp. So they've engineered it specifically not to have that ammonia to come out, which I learned from the guy who's in charge of their whole like product line through Brightwell. I got an opportunity to speak with him through my friend Darren, the guy who has that huge 600-gallon saltwater tank that we did an interview with in the past. It was really kind of a cool chat. I got to learn some stuff about their substrate because I had some questions of like how it was different than say Fluval or stuff like that. So there's a little tidbit of info that's kind of interesting. But yeah, Brightwell has been really popular for shrimp. Brightwell's product line in general is like really popular in the saltwater side of the hobby, and they've been pushing more on freshwater. And if you can tell by the information I have and me saying I'm going to try a different substrate soon, you can probably put 2 and 2 together at what I'm trying here soon. And I'll give you guys full details on that stuff very, very soon. So, got some... Okay, one last question. I'm going over time by a lot, but we took time getting started, so why the heck not? Why is Aquarium Co-op stopping their affiliate program? I will be indirectly quoting Corey here. He did mention this specifically in... I think it was a live stream on the Corey McElroy channel, so his business-oriented channel, where he teaches like YouTube business and stuff like that. I think they basically just had looked at it and realized that the benefit of doing the affiliate program versus like picking I hate the term influencers, but influencer is the accurate term these days. And sending products out them to test and check out for free. It was just better in their when they're looking at all their stuff for them. It just ended up being more efficient or whatever to do it that way. It doesn't. It's not about it costing too much or anything like that. It was just the amount of business drummed up through a majority of the affiliate type stuff. It was not enough where it was so obvious that this is better than sending out like lots of product to people and having them play with those different products and then talk about them. So basically giving people product instead of like an affiliate commission type thing. Now, if you want full details on that, Corey's video is going to give you better details on it. But unless that decision has changed, which I highly doubt it has, they're ending their affiliate program. And just there's a lot of stuff that like is just easier for people to do via Amazon because of how like shipping certain things is very difficult for the co-op. They can't do as much stuff as they might like to do, especially considering that the USPS has upped its shipping costs like 3 or 4 times in the last year and a half, which is murder on small business, even extremely successful small business like the aquarium co-op. It's really hard when you're chunking into their kind of profit margins and stuff like that for their ability to keep going. And in their case, like, you know, they give their employees like really good wages compared to what the actual minimum wage and stuff like is compared. So, you know, take that as you will. I'm not bitter about it. It's just a matter of like, hey, I have this until the end of this year. So you'll notice, like, if you've looked at the descriptions, I've been leaving out my aquarium co-op affiliate stuff because I know it ends this year and I'm not really like, I'm trying to kind of pre-train myself to not have that there anymore, just because I still love aquarium co-op. Everything I have, I've bought from them. I don't think they've even, when have I ever gotten free from aquarium co-op? Let me think about this for a minute. I have a red Murphy shirt and a hat and a luggage tag. Those 3 things were all got at AGA. So it was for meeting him in person as opposed to like having any kind of product. Everything I've ever bought or had from aquarium co-op I've paid for. Like, but that just tells you, like, I love small businesses. It's Small Business Saturday for those that might not know. Go out and support your local small business. Please don't spend your money at Walmart. Spend it at a small business wherever possible. I would even say the same for Amazon, even though I use Amazon too, just like you guys do. But if you can't, spend it at a small local business. It's better for your area in general to have small business around instead of just the supreme corporate overlords. But you know, support your small businesses. I guess that's going to be my last little. But yeah, it's just one of those things. I think that, and I'm sure that watch that stream. It's a lot better information than what I'm telling you. Basically, they figured out it would be better for the company and the number of people that they could basically work with at the same time to send out demo product, basically put, as opposed to setting up affiliate links. So yeah, I mean, that business decisions get made. That's part of life. And for me, I was just kind of like, okay, I think I've made like $30 through mine, so it's not like I'm losing. It's not like I'm suddenly shocked. I don't make a ton of money on that kind of stuff, and that basically paid for some fish food for a couple months. I got through a lot of fish food, if that's not obvious, with the number of tanks I have. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for showing up on Saturday live stream. December live stream might be a little weird just because of timing. I'm trying to think. It'll be like, I think it'll be the weekend before Christmas, if I remember correctly. And I will hopefully I will have everything lined up, have a completely different streaming setup as far as I'll be able to use my camera. I'm picking up a little capture device, and maybe even have a slightly different microphone setup so that it's a little, might hear a little less of the stuff around me. So check that stuff out. There you go. Thank you, Candy. There's Corey's video if you want to know kind of the details as far as what's going on with that affiliate program. But don't worry about it too much. We're doing fine. For those of us that we're doing that stuff, they're figuring stuff out. So Thank you so much for joining, folks. Hopefully I got to everyone's question. If I didn't get to your question, please shoot me a comment on this thing. I answer comments, or just shoot me an email. That's bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Exactly the same as it's spelled on the channel. You're welcome to shoot me an email. I try to answer them all within 24 hours. It depends on how busy I am. And sometimes I answer them almost immediately. If you happen to catch me at the right time, like I'm walking between meetings and see an email, I'll shoot answers out as fast as I can. So thank you guys for joining. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your weekend. If you are in the United States, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys again real soon. As always, guys, thank you so much, and stay awesome.